So this is sort of the second part to last video. Last time we were doing the hubs and rebuilding the swivel hubs. Now this time we actually have to rebuild the wheel hub. Now I've got all new parts for this, new seals, I've got new rotors, I've got new studs, pretty much got everything. Now where I'm going to start with this, I'm going to first get rid of the old rotor, but to do that we have to push all the old studs out. So just get a hammer and knock each one of those out. So to get these old wheel studs out, just got a decent hammer. Sometimes you can put the nut on there if you want to reuse it. Saves smashing the end over, but it doesn't really matter for me. I'm just going to knock them out. There they are, all 6 studs. Don't really need those. Now there's 2 14mm bolts inside here. You pull those off and you can whack the rotor off. So now that all the studs and bolts are loose, we can jam my hammerhead back on and then give it a whack and try and break it loose. There's your hub, there's your rotor. Don't need that rotor, we've got a new one to put on. So now inside here you can see there's the oil seal. Now there's a few ways to get that out. You can get proper pullers, or you can get pry bars and just rip it out. There's the seal, there's the big bearing. Now we can go knock the races out and put some new ones in. Now knocking the races out of the hub is really quite similar to doing it in the swivel hub. In the bottom there you can see there's the 2 notches where you can put your punch, and you just stick your punch in there and go, give one side a whack, give the other side a whack. This is probably going to have to go back in the vise because this has got to be pressed all the way out and it's sitting flush with the edge at the moment, so I'll go knock it out the rest of the way in the vise. So now that you've got your old races out, you can go putting your new ones in. Now these are wrapped around the bearing, so you just take your bearing out of the packaging, put the bearing back in, take those out, and it'll slot in there and you'll feel where it sits nicely, and you can just get a pin punch or a drift and knock it in like that. It's a little bit sketchy because you can slip off the edge and damage the surface, then the race is pretty much junk. Or you can get your old one, put a little 1mm grinding disc through it, sit that in there and then hit the old one down and it won't damage the new one then. Now you can usually feel and hear when it's seated. You can just go look at the other end and look at the notch in there where you actually put the drift in to hit it out, and you'll see it's nice and flush. So now all the new races are in, it's clean. We'll just give it a little bit of a sand down. Then we'll put a little bit of anti-seize on there. So here's the new rotor, it's got 8 holes in it, 2 little ones for the bolts, and then 6 big ones for the rest of it. So now I'll just put the 2 little bolts in, just to hold it in place. So now we've got our new studs and nuts. Dump these out, a little bit of anti-seize on them, and then stick them in. Now there's a few ways you can put these in. One, you can get a ball peen hammer or a pretty small headed hammer and you can hit in there. That's a bit dodgy because if you miss just slightly, you smash the machine surface of where the seal sits, and I actually did that with the other side and probably spent about an hour trying to get this back. Wasn't too good, but you know, you can do that, or you can get yourself one of these little air hammers, sit that on there and just hammer it in like that. I don't know if this one's going to be strong enough, but we may as well give it a try. So that little air hammer got them in as far as it could. I'm going to have to take the risk and just hit them around like this. They seem to be going in pretty easy. Easier than the other side at least. So now we've got the new studs in the hub, we can start to think about getting some bearings ready and almost putting it back on the car. So before we start putting this seal in, we have to get the bigger bearing of the lot and grease it up first and put that in, because that bearing sits in there, then the seal sits over that and kind of holds the bearing in. So we've got some grease here and we'll just start packing this. So packing these bigger bearings is the same as packing the Kingpin bearings. You go from the open side, get a bit in your hand and just squeeze it through your palm. So now that one's done, plop that in there. Get the second bearing and we may as well do that now. So now we can put the seal in. Make sure you got the bearing in there first, and you just sit it in there equally and try and give it a bit of a tap down. So before we actually put it on, we have to fill the hub up with a bit of grease. Now you make it almost level with the races, not quite level, just a bit below, but you just put a nice bit of grease in there and it should be right. So that's that seal in, it's nice and flush. You can see that bearing's actually stuck in there now, not coming out. Might get a bit of that grease and just put it along the seal surface, and then we can go pick this up and stick it on the car. And you'll feel it, you just get it lined up, then that seal will clip over. Now you've got this smaller outer bearing and that just slips in there. You feel it sit in there, and then we'll go get the nut kit. Now this is your nut kit. It's got everything you need in here. You pull it out, it's got your thrust washer that sits in there. Then we've got two nuts, they're the same, so thread one on and we'll torque this down. Give it a turn to make sure it is all seated properly. So it has to be done to 56 Newton meters. And then twist it around a bit. And then you can undo that. And you have to then do that up to about 5 Newton meters, which my torque wrench doesn't go down to, so we'll just have a bit of a guess what that is. So after you've got that roughly torqued down, if you have a torque wrench that goes that low, it's probably useful. But I'm just going to set the locking washer on and just put that other nut on, and then we'll test the preload on it. So around 4 kilos is what the preload's meant to be. We'll just hook it on there and give it a pull. That's probably too much, so we might loosen that adjuster nut off and see if we can get it a bit looser. Now the final part is this locking hub. So this takes your power from the axle that's constantly turning, and it takes it to the wheels when you want it to. You can turn it on or off. You can pull all this apart, but there's a little indent ball in there that's pretty easy to lose. So you just have that there, pop all that off, comes apart. You can take all this apart too, but there's no need to. Just clean it up with a bit of brake cleaner, put a bit of grease around it, put a new gasket on, and you can slap it back on the car. So now I'll put the locking hub on. Now it's got these 2 other holes in the face there, and they go to those pins, won't go in any other way. It's got these splines on the inside that they'll have to get lined up, and it'll slot on like that. But before we do that, we'll get a bit more of the gasket maker and put a bit of that around the surface. Now we can put the gasket on, and I'll put a bit of sealer on the hub side as well. So now the cone washers go in, and then on top of the cone washers you put your spring washers, then your nut, and we'll torque all these down. So now that we've got this on and all the nuts are tightened down, we've got to torque this to 30 Newton meters. So now I get this snap ring and I'll just clip it in there Make sure it's all seated. That's in. Now put a bit of grease in there and we'll put the actual locking dial on. Now slide the dial in. Sits in there. Make sure it all works. Pops out. It's locking in. It's unlocking. Now we'll just get the bolts and put those in.